This morning, I want to welcome you all to our presentation and discussion on neurodiversity and inclusion. I would like to introduce my colleague Liana Konjarski, who also works with us here at MCM. She has worked in the ECMS space through some SRF for a little bit of time, and she stepped over into a team leader role alongside us and has been working with our early childhood team and with our key workers and therapists around really supporting our team in building some neuroaffirming practice and developing a bit more of a neuroaffirming framework. So she's done lots of conversationing, lots of research and discussion with some colleagues and others with lived experience in the neurodiversity space as well. So comes with lots of different bits and pieces. It will be a conversation over the next little while. Hopefully we get through what we've got, all of our bits today, but we'll see how we go. Any questions, please let us know. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on here today. For us, it is Wurundjeri country. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to acknowledge all First Nations people working through Melbourne City Mission and ECMS. We also acknowledge the ongoing leadership role of First Nations communities in creating services and supports to ensure that all First Nations children are raised in safe, healthy and culturally rich families and communities and have every opportunity for a bright future. Alrighty, let's get started.
All right.
Liana, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me. So today's idea is sort of introducing some topics you may or may not be familiar with, including some of the terminology, what is autism and what does assessment look like, what would autism or neurodiversity look like at kinder, some of the other concepts that come alongside that, so terms like masking and spoon theory, and then some of the changes that we've made at our organisation that maybe can be contributed to or adapted to suit your program at the kinders that you're working at as well. And then at the end, we're just talking about how we can create neuroaffirming spaces at kinder, which benefits not only neurodivergent children, but all children here as well that go to our services. So some of these terms may actually be more familiar than not, but I think it's always good to review them and go over it together and look at the concepts as a whole. So I guess I wanted to start off with the concept that diversity in general means that everyone is different and unique, everybody likes different things, and we all look different. So before we even looking into neurodiversity and different brain types and things like that, it's a reminder that diversity naturally occurs in our society anyway. So we can look at, different hair color as an example. We can look at different eye color. We look at different race, different religion, and neurodiversity or different types of brains is also another type of diversity that naturally occurs in our society too. So, so like I said before, we were talking about all the different types of diversity that already exists and you can probably spot in the room. Neurodiversity might be something that is less obvious as well, so it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at the programs that you run. So specifically, we're looking at diversity of human brains. So neurodiversity is the idea that a brain might process information differently than what a typical neurotypical brain may experience things. And that is something that we would see in different examples in society. So if you think about some of the really different minds in the world, different artists, different scientists, things like that, they may not be neurodivergent, but they already have a different brain. So I know, for example, Brooke and I, we process things very differently. She is fantastic at doing maths and like calculations and really careful thought about how process is done. And I think I'm a little bit more reactive to things and sort of use a lot of metaphors and analogies to sort of explain things in my head too. So yeah, even just in the difference that we process things, everyone's brain is different. So that's the overlying concept I want us to start with here today. So let's do a quick terminology check-in. So feel free to pop some stuff into the chat if you have heard these terms before. If you haven't, if there's anything you're unsure of, also pop them in there and we can see if we have time at the end to go through. But you've probably heard the terms neurodiversity, autism, ADHD, neurodivergent, and basically these are words that we use to describe different types of brains. So the word neurodiversity in general applies to all of us. So when we talk about neurodiversity, it's the fact that society as a whole is neurodiverse. We all have different brains and it's the natural variation that occurs amongst humans. A neurodivergent brain is one that differs from the most common brain type or neurotype, but it's not inferior. So someone that is autistic, has ADHD or dyslexia are some examples of neurodivergent brains. A neurotypical brain is one that is the most common brain type. So neurotypical is a brain type that does not have neurodivergent brain. So Brooke and I love this resource. So NeuroWild is a Instagram page run by a person with lived experience, and they do these wonderful little infographics that I think are so helpful to conceptualize some of the concepts that we're looking at and explain it to us. So you can see here that it's discussing having a neurotypical brain in the top left-hand corner, but then you're looking at the brains in the bottom half of the page and you can see there's all different types of different brains. So someone that might have dyslexia, bipolar, autism, sensory processing disorder, ADHD are just some examples of brains that process information differently to a neurotypical brain. Okay, so here we're discussing some terms to know. So I think what we find initially is when you talk about neurodiversity or neurodivergent, they all kind of sound the same and people might use them interchangeably as if they are the same sort of word, but there are small distinct differences and it's something that you can consider. I'd really encourage you all to print this slide out and keep it somewhere in your offices as it's a really helpful one to explain the difference and the nuance between the different terms. So you can see there, neurodiversity, again, is the fundamental truth that we're all diverse. So that's talking about society in general. Neurodivergent is the word that we're using as an umbrella term to describe the individual who has a brain that is different to a neurotypical brain. Neurotypical is the term to describe the individual person who has like the dominant societal brain. And then neuronormativity is a word that we can use to explain how society is set up to basically serve the neurotypical brain. So people that are neurodivergent are going to have more challenges naturally because the world is not set up for them in a way that is easy and simple and considerate of different processing. So yeah, and the word neurodiverse is just there to describe the group or population of people who have a brain that is different to a neurotypical one. So yeah, again, just another little infographic there to describe all the different types of neurodivergence. Again, it's just a word to describe. It doesn't mean that all of the strategies, the information that you provide, the experiences are going to be similar because everybody is different. And that's what I would like everyone to take away from this, is that neurodivergent brains are not less than or wrong or difficult. They are just different. And they also, within neurodivergent communities, there's more difference there too. So like, we meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Not all autistic people are like that. You meet one person with epilepsy, you've met one person with epilepsy. Not everyone will have the same experience, even if they all have epilepsy. So yeah, just an idea to get a head around all the different things that can be included. So yeah, Brooke, should I speak to autism too? Yeah, great. So autism is probably the most commonly known or predominant version of neurodivergence that's discussed, especially in early childhood settings. So it's probably something that you might have heard of, might see, might have experience with from your own children or family members as well. And it's it's important to know that it's a lifelong neurodevelopmental difference. So it's not acquired, even if you are found out later in life. Like, say, a lot of women, for example, might find out later in their 30s. It doesn't mean that you are acquiring it or getting it later. You're always born with it. It's just that you are sort of experiencing the diagnosis later in life. Every single autistic person is different. Yes, some common traits may occur, like obviously there is some diagnostic criteria, such as things with challenges with social communication and restricted or repetitive behaviours or actions is something that needs to be considered in a diagnosis. However, what that looks like for every single person is completely different. So what you might see in one child, say for example a 4-year-old boy that might not be speaking yet and sort of have these really repetitive hand movements and sort of staying in one corner and not really engaging with other children, may be autistic, but so might the really talkative 3-year-old girl who gets really close to all of her friends and wants to connect with everybody and might just find it difficult to sort of keep the play going. They may both be autistic, but again, having completely different experiences. And the other thing to consider is that autistic people can often excel in some areas too. So some people might have like really great math skills. Someone might have a lot of children have the ability to read text really young. And I knew this one child that I worked with that could recite the entire Ice Age movie from start to finish by memory. And like that, if that's not incredible, I don't know what is. So it's just a thing to remember that when we're talking about autism and neurodivergence, it's not always a deficit, and I don't want us to use these deficit models. I want us to think about the strengths base. So everyone's going to have something that they're good at, everyone's going to have things that they can build upon to help them, support them as well. So yeah, now we've probably heard the spectrum that everyone talks about, and in our head, I don't know about you, but when I was hearing this earlier on, I kind of thought it was like this linear line where you're like a little bit a neurodivergent, then you're like really neurodivergent, but it's more like a circle rather than a scale. So what that you can see on the bottom picture there, you can see all the different types of skills and functional components of our words, and you can see that this person has a really full social skills. So they're actually doing, they love being social, but they might find that they have more restricted interests or higher sensitivities or more repetitions that are more obvious in the way that their autism is presenting as well. So yeah, lots of different strengths and difficulties, and that will look different for every person. Okay. So diagnosing autism, Brooke and I can both speak to this one. So this is something that is not at all the responsibility of the caregivers or yourself as educators. It's something that needs to be done by a trained professional. So it needs to be a clinical psychologist or a pediatrician, and they have to meet the criteria on the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5. So Brooke might speak to this a little bit more.
Yeah. So thank you. The process, it can be a complex one. I'm sure you guys have experience of your little ones at kinder waiting for a diagnosis or on that wait list for a diagnosis. So what does that process look like, and what kind of how long does it take? There's two kind of main assessments at this stage. One of them is called the ADOS, and that's been the most established for our little humans, which is the Autistic Diagnostic Observation Scale. And that is an observation-based assessment. It needs to be done with two different professionals in a space, so it needs to be done with some kind of combination of speech pathology, occupational therapy, and psychology. It can be done with 2 or 3 in that space. A pediatrician may or may not be part of that criteria as well. So there is, as part of that assessment, there's an on-the-day component to that where a child comes into a space and works through a series of kind of semi-structured tasks, and based on responses that the kids give in that space, kind of ratings or scorings are given, and that kind of overall contributes to whether a child fits criteria for autism or not. The other part of that looks at information from home, so parent interviews, what's been happening at home, kind of that long-term evidence as well. So for our little guys, we want to kind of track that back to when they were 12 months old, when they were 2 years old. What was that looking like? For adults and teenagers, we're looking back to parent reports, if that's available, from when these teenagers were littlies. What was happening here? Was there clues? Was there things that kind of were indicative back then? Some reflections, some school reports, anything that we can kind of get out of that. So conversations with family, also conversations with educators as well. So quite often you might get a form to fill in, or some questionnaire or a phone call around how is one of your little ones operating in this kinder space? What works? What is challenging for them? What does it look like? So what we want to be really sure when we're doing those assessments is that the same kind of things are happening across different settings and with different pressures. So sometimes our little guys are really great one-on-one with an adult in an environment, but when we put them in a group learning environment, that's where the challenges present themselves a little bit more as well. So we want to be really sure that that things are happening across different environments, which is where you guys come into that diagnostic part as well. Once the ADOS is done, a paediatrician also needs to sign off on that. A paediatrician alone is not best practice in diagnosing autism. Used to be the process and is not anymore. So that multidisciplinary assessment is really important. There's other assessments out there, one called the MIGDAS, which is becoming more and more popular at the moment. But there's a couple around. In terms of waiting times for public assessments, depending on where you are, I know Western Suburbs, Melton Health are 18 months to 2 years at least for a publicly funded assessment. For privately funded assessment, the cost is looking at $2,500, if not more than that, by the time, taking into account times for report writing, taking in account conversations with families, with educators, with the child coming in. There's so many bits that form that. So you can see that that's quite prohibitive for many families. There is a little bit of a Medicare rebate on that, but not a lot. And depending on which school a child is going to, so having an autism diagnosis doesn't mean you have to go to an autistic school. That is definitely not at all what we're trying to get across here. It sometimes will open up options, so things like Western Autistic or NIDRI Autistic or NSA or Southern School for Autism, depends on where you are, but some of those criteria for support or entry into that school mean a multidisciplinary assessment has to be done with a paediatrician sign-off and specifically a psychology sign-off as well. So we need 1, 2, 3 parts of that, which can also lead to barriers for some of our little guys who are heading off into that autistic school specifically, to make sure that we've got all those 3 bits, because multi-dis assessment needs to be done and a paediatrician assessment needs to be done, but the psychology may or may not be part of that, but that becomes a prohibitive barrier. Thanks, Department of Education, for their little bit prehistoric criteria on that. We're hoping that will change soon, but that's where we're at. So for that, the criteria according to the DSM to receive an autism diagnosis, this is very wordy, apologies. It's definitely not neuroaffirming language. But straight from the DSM-5, it looks at needing persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. So challenges in that social interaction in those multiple contexts. Deficits in social emotional reciprocity, so that initiating backwards and forwards conversation can be challenging. Reduced sharing of interests, so it might look like one-sided sharing of interests. The emotional, that emotional backwards and forwards, the affect or that use of facial expression, sorry, and that maybe leading to more one-sided initiation of social interaction. So that's part one. The second part of this looks at the restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviour, interests or activities, where we're seeing the same activity engaged in or the same pattern of behaviour engaged in over and over again, or coming back to do the same thing in a specific way or in a specific order. Stereotyped or repetitive movements, so that might be our flapping that we might see, it might be moving things, that kind of typical stimming behaviour. Use of objects or speech in the same pattern, so lining up toys, flipping objects, some echolalia, so that direct repeating of what they may have just heard, or the same scripting of a phrase. Insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routine, so that challenge when things are different, ritualized patterns, or verbal or non-verbal behavior. So we might perceive something as teeny tiny little change, and it might be taken on as quite a really big thing. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of bits, but both of those two top things need to be in place, observed in those different environments. And then the third part of that is that the above are present from early childhood and mean a significant impairment in social, occupational, other performance areas, important for current functioning. And their presentation is not better explained by an intellectual disability or global developmental delay. Going to add a layer of trauma on that as well, that we need to differentiate from trauma as well, because we know that some of these things present similarly. In terms of that trauma component, we really need to go back to the really early stages. So if there is we can kind of pinpoint a little bit more specifically around when that trauma has occurred. It helps to do a little bit of comparison backwards and forwards if that information is available as well. Just because a child has a trauma diagnosis does not mean they can't have an autism diagnosis as well, but often it's a little bit, we need to pick things out a little bit more carefully. Liana, do you want to continue?
Sure. Yes.
Thanks.
So, I guess now...
Sorry, can we stop there? Yes. Before we move into this next bit, has anybody got any questions, feedback from where we're at? We're happy to keep going. Feel free to unmute.
We've both got the chat up if you need to. We can jump in.
All right, let's go.
Cool. Okay, so we have an overview of what autism and neurodivergence is as a whole. Let's look at it more specifically at kinder, where you would be seeing it. So if we're looking at the areas or domains of development, we have multiple, like communication, sensory, movement, things like that. So if we look at sensory, some of the things you may see in some children, especially autistic children, may be stimming. So you might see some flapping hands, children that might hum, have certain repetitive sounds. They might have children that rock back and forth because they're not seeking that proprioceptive movement. There might be children that look at things quite closely, getting that visual stimuli quite close to their eyes. You might have children that move around the room because they're enjoying that movement in their body. You might have children that are really adverse to loud noises and get quite frightened by loud noises, or when the room's really, really busy, so during like lunchtime and things like that, they might try and sit towards the edge because they find it overwhelming. You might also see children that get very distressed when their hands are touching like sand or water or any other things like that as well. Or you might have children that love it and want to jump in there and get it all over themselves, either or. Yeah. So communication differences. So for context, both Brooke and I are speech pathologists by background, so this is our bread and butter. But there are lots of things to look at. Now, we do have eye contact listed there, and that's absolutely a thing that a lot of autistic people do find direct eye contact sometimes difficult or sometimes painful. We've heard from adults, but that doesn't always mean that you're autistic if there's no eye contact. There's also many autistic people that do great eye contact. So eye contact should not be the only thing that you sort of seek out, but it's just one of the pieces that you can put together to work out if that might be meeting the needs of the child. Again, that echolalia, which Brooke said before, so repeating back sentences. So someone might say, do you want a drink? And they say, you want a drink? We also have other types of echolalia that I said before where the child was repeating a script. That's called delayed echolalia. So that's a child that is remembering lots of information and then at another time where they're not watching the movie is repeating the words again. We might have children that do not use their words to speak. They might use their body or their gesture. So lots of hand leading might be one of the ways they communicate. Children might also cry or have big meltdowns, and that again, behavior is communication. What are they trying to tell us with the way that they're expressing themselves? There might be children that have difficulty reading other people's emotions. So again, not recognizing when someone is cross with tone or facial expression. They might have difficulty reading the room. So, sometimes children might not recognize when someone's upset and sort of come in with a joke. Or another thing might be that indirect language, like, oh, it's a really lovely day today. I can see the sun's out. I wonder what that means. That might be a bit too tricky instead of, it's time to put our hat on. We have to put our hat on to go outside, which is much more direct. And then, different ways to connect with children interact. So, every child's different. Some children might want to get up close and personal, others may not. So, different things to consider there.
Liana, we haven't touched on this, just thinking about that delayed echolalia and what that might look like. And there's a pattern of communication which we haven't really listed on here that looks around, it's called gestalt language processing. And that might be something that we're starting to see a little bit more. And as speech pathologists, we're starting to recognize the power of this a little bit more, where we might start to see a script or a little phrase that might be from it might be from a movie, it might be from a TV commercial, it might be from something that mum says over and over again, it might be something that you guys say. And I've definitely seen kinder scripts come home with an implication of something. So it might be a child who was starting to sing the Wheels on the Bus song. The wheels on the bus go round and round, which actually may have the implication of, I want to go out, I want to get in the car. So it might have a really specific meaning to it. So if we're starting to see the same kind of script over and over again, let's start to have a look at the context. Detective work 101 is absolutely required. There is no finite way of understanding exactly what that means, but starting to put the clues together. What is the context? What might be going on? What can we see? And is there a pattern? If we're starting to get this same script over and over again in a similar kind of context, what possibly could that mean? So it's a challenging space to be in. But some of our little guys start to learn language in a different way. So those who have done teacher talk with us, we've talked through typical language development, and we start with one word and then we add 2 words and we add 3 words. Some of our little gestalt language processes might be starting with big chunks of language and almost work in reverse. So they start with a huge chunk of language with a whole sentence or a whole paragraph of words with meaning behind that, and then they start to bring that down. We're not going to go into any more detail than that. There is a huge component that sit behind that. But I think it's something for us to just be really aware of if we're getting that same script at the same time, starting to try and work out, what does this mean? There's meaning behind it. What is it? And trying to unpack that. Conversation with caregivers also so important in that space, because they may also be getting it. But be rest assured, if for some of our little gestalt language processes, things that are happening over and over again at kinder are also gestalts that are heading home. I've heard many a kinder teacher comments or songs that have been sung or phrases that have also headed home, and in reverse as well.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. Sometimes I like to attribute it to sometimes Gestalt language processors have almost like a jukebox in their brain of phrases that they can pull out to, like wheels on the bus might be going outside in a car, and then maybe they might say it's time to go now, is what their mum says every time. So maybe when they say that it's time to go now, they might do that. Or they might have a song about eating that they like that they sing at lunchtime. So yeah, lots of detective work to think about. So play differences as well. It's probably something that you're more across than anything as educators. I know this is your bread and butter about play. You might see some autistic children have a preference for playing by themselves or playing with the same toys in the same way each time. So some examples of this is like lining up toys and looking at them, repeating them, scripts from their favorite shows as well. It's really important that you're across this already, but not changing their play because it's wrong, but maybe adding to it or commenting about it, and being really aware that it is play, even though it might look a little bit different to what another child might do with that toy. And then we have some children that love their routines and love their letters and numbers too, which might be their favorite part of the kinder. So we talked about a bunch of things that you could see. They may be neurodivergent, they may not be, but if they are neurodivergent, it's really important to remember these children are not inferior to the other children in the classroom. We all know that each child deserves equal rights, but it also doesn't mean that they're doing anything wrong. It just means that they're doing stuff that's different, and just different from the norm. It's just a good way to highlight some of the things that you can see in the classroom, and also just useful as a reflective practice piece to think about if you're unsure or you're sitting on the fence about some children, maybe reflecting on some of the things we've discussed today.
This will link, I know we talked a little bit about the sensory differences earlier. Our colleague Sasha, who is an OT, there's a whole presentation. I know there's a live one coming up fairly soon around some of those sensory processing differences, what that looks like, seeing if we can kind of link some of the behaviours or what might be underpinning that into some sensory needs as well. So starting to unpick. I know we talked about some, Liana kind of talked about some proprioceptive input or some vestibular input, huge amount of wording in that, and something that we may or may not be aware of, but there is a separate training that goes into that in a whole bunch more detail as well. So we'll gloss over it today, but there is separate training that is available. It is, I think, already been recorded, so it is on the SRF YouTube link already, but there'll be another live presentation of that in a couple of weeks as well.
So we've got us in a minute, we're going to have a chance to reflect and pause and do some of our own thinking. But just before we get to that, we've spoken a lot about autism. There are different types of neurodivergence. So you might also have heard the term ADHD. So that is standing for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Again, very deficit-based language, not something that we would use as educators or therapists, but again, it's a neurodevelopmental difference. It might be considered where people have patterns of inattentive, impulsive, or sometimes hyperactive behavior, and some children might actually have, instead of hyperactivity, might have difficulty focusing instead of hyperactivity. Approximately 1 in 20 children in Australia have ADHD too, so something else to consider. You might also see similar things with autistic children and children with ADHD, such as, repetitive behaviours or social differences. But oftentimes these children will understand some of the nuances of social situations and things like that, and it'll be a lot more around the either hyperactivity or the inability to focus will be their main challenges that they're seeing. You might also have some children with sensory processing differences, such as food aversions or sensitivities to light and sound. Sometimes they won't be autistic. It will just be children with really sensitive experiences in those areas. Also, our orders. So like there's dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, so specific learning disorders that affect reading, writing, and speaking. Again, if you notice any challenges in these areas, it's always good just to have a conversation with the parent in a really inclusive way of like, I've just noticed a few things. What have you noticed? And then bipolar, other mental health challenges, and then Down syndrome as well. So these are all different types of neurodivergence. And I can see, Mary, you've popped in the chat about PDA. So PDA is an interesting thing. It's contentious because not everyone believes that it's a real thing. Some people do, some people don't. But PDA is like persistent demand avoidance is probably the most commonly agreed upon name that's strengths-based. But PDA is usually a way to describe a profile of autism. So it's when autistic children or people might experience difficulties with direct requests or demands placed on them that causes them to either shut down or refuse to do, or sometimes it can be perceived as a threat to their regulation systems, which can cause a lot of other difficulties. PDA, again, it's sort of a profile of autism. Some people think that it is encompassing, and some people might agree that it's just part of autistic profiles. It's really the evidence is still being researched at the moment, but it's definitely something that there's more conversation about, especially in parent groups and things like that as well. PDD and ODD. So yes and no, oppositional defiance disorder. Again, I think that was a diagnosis that was maybe more commonly used years ago and less so now, especially in young children. PDA is not seen as necessarily defiance, but a physiological threat to the body nervous system and how they are able to respond to that. So it's not coming across as defiant, but maybe having a physiological reaction to the demands placed on the child with autism. Is that what you would sort of say, Brooke, with that area? Yeah. So
it's such a challenging space. We've actually been doing some training on it recently, in looking at that, those PDA profiles and where the research and where the criteria is up to in terms of diagnosis, and we're definitely not there yet. So it's definitely more looking at a profile stage, but we're not at that diagnosis stage. We can put some more resources in the chat if you would like some more information on that. There's some lovely training that's available and around at the moment around that PDA profile, but it's definitely not looking at a choice that child is making, as in I'm choosing not to follow your instruction, I'm choosing not to do that just because. It's sitting more at a physiological base. So I just can't, as in the body has a big response in that I can't do that, or needing to kind of to have, I think persistent drive for autonomy is another kind of change in language around that PDA as well. So I want to be able to not always do it solely by myself, but I want to contribute to the decisioning of this. I want to choose to participate and see that as more of a balance rather than the imbalance that may happen.
Yeah,
certainly a tricky space at kinder.
There's so
Marion, many.
Also, sorry, the ADHD can occur with autism. So PDA wouldn't be considered its own diagnosis by itself. It would be an element of an autistic profile. So yes, ADHD and autism can occur and often does with a lot of the children that we see. But yeah, PDA is again a profile or a subtype of sort of part of the autistic diagnosis. So yeah, no, I agree. It is tricky, isn't it, Brooke? To sort of know.
Very challenging space. Just a note on that ADHD diagnosis age. Sophie, I can see this question. Let me come back to that in a second. Diagnosis age for ADHD is often around that 5 or 6 years old. So peds are really reluctant to provide that diagnosis before a child hits school. So just know that may be something that families are super aware of, that they they may be headed down that pathway. It may be highly suspected, but it's often, the peds are often reluctant to provide a diagnosis before a child has hit that 5 or 6 years, and normally when they've started school as well. So it can be challenging. Sophie.
So sorry, Sophie, I can't
hear
you.
Sophie, we can't get your mic working. Type it out. That would be amazing. Thank you. All right. While you're doing typing, we're going to move. No, we won't.
Yeah, actually,
we will hold on. We will hold off for Sophie's question, and then we will. I'm just going to find that KidLink OT training and post that in the chat while we keep going.
Yeah, we actually had our therapist do a training as well recently. We're noticing our kinder environment and curriculum makes space for lots of neurodiversity. How to identify children who struggle beyond kinder. Yes. Yeah, so the kinder environment is, like you said, Sophie, pretty inclusive as it is, and it stands. Like there's a lot of space to for each child to play as they wish and have all the scaffolding within the classroom. I agree, and that's what we love kinder. We always push children to attend kinder because they'll have those amazing experiences. How we identify children who struggle beyond kinder, yeah, it is tricky. We would look at more around when you take away the scaffolding, when you take away all of the support that you've put into place, so things like considering they're in a prep classroom with 30 kids, one teacher. They say, okay, everybody go to your tub, pull out the blue book and write your name in the top left-hand corner. If a child will struggle with that task, it's usually something that I say to parents and educators. There's usually more investigation to be done. Is it the way that, language is being understood? If a 4-year-old cannot understand 2-part instructions at that age, as they're getting in the second half of kindergarten and 3-part instructions, it's probably going to be challenging for them. If the child is not yet using their verbal words when they are, even in 3-year-old kindergarten, absolutely a referral to NDIS or the speech pathologist is absolutely required. And then for the children that are less noticeable and sort of you're cuspy, you're not sure, I would have a conversation with the parents around their, what they are seeing for what their child needs at home and how much scaffolding they're putting in place. And then also you can have conversations with the PSFOs that come into your classrooms, and also the ECMS SRF staff that, from MCM would be more than happy to have conversations around, certain children in the classroom, where should we refer on? Where should we go from there as well? So yeah, definitely. Oh, your practice coaches as well. They're a great resource for this sort of thing as well.
Quite interesting. Some of our little guys have more challenges when they get to school, particularly in that demand space. Some of our little guys really respond well to the little bit more predictable nature of what school looks like around. I've got a specific spot to sit in. I've got a specific, a specific order, structure, routine for what that day looks like. Some children really benefit from that much more structured environment and the predictable environment, and play can be so unpredictable in that space. It's very highly there's such a high focus on that social engagement, social interaction, having to navigate that social group learning space, whereas school can be a little bit different in that, being a little bit more individual in there as well. Alrighty, I am just going to stop sharing for a second because I don't think I have shared with sound, and you definitely need the sound. So we will try again. Alrighty, so hopefully you can see that video now. It's going to be a lot. The point of it is to be a lot. So it will introduce itself, and yeah, we'll have a bit of a chat about it after.
Two, three, four, five, 6, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand. No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? It's fine. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
It's a lot. It's a lot for our little guys. Anybody got thoughts or reflections, or that's brought something up for them? You can kind of see how some things that may be perceived as just teeny tiny little bits. For me, it was that little shoelace. It's like, oh, the shoelace is undone. But that was something that was really big for that little guy. You think about how that may also present across into kinder, and what that might look like as well. The sounds, hugely.
Yeah, Rachel, you can often hear people at shops comment about other children saying they're naughty, but they're not having an educated opinion on that one. Yeah, I think it's very challenging for the caregivers too in that situation to sort of navigate that. But yeah, you're right. I think it gives you a good perspective in that, yeah, the balloons rubbing against each other might not seem like a big deal, but they're already in overwhelm by the time that comes. It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back for children sometimes.
Everybody's perception of those different sounds is different as well. Something that may be perceived by one person as just a background sound, may be really spotlighted and put in the, kind of really overemphasized and really taken on. I think there was a crunching of an apple, or there was something in there. And for me, that is, I can't do. I can't do that. Really drives straight into my brain. But that for me is just one tiny component of that, for all of those things to come together. What's that kid going to look like when he goes home? Or when they get out of there? What's that going to look like? What would that be like for you if you've just been in that experience? Hugely dysregulated. Yeah. Yep. Completely overwhelmed. You could see him start to do some stimming in that space as well. This is predictable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You might see some of your kids come back into that predictable pattern. They're coming back to doing what they know, and what's really comfortable in that space, just to try and hold it together. And you might notice that same kind of thing happening for your little guys. It's often where we get he's good at kinder, and then he falls apart when they go home, and they've held it together. We might have seen some of the stimming behaviour. We might have seen this has all been on, up at volume 10 for all of these different things. We've done a really good job of holding it together at kinder. we get home and it all falls apart. And it's so important to listen to families and to trust that is happening as well, because families in that moment go, what am I doing wrong in this space? Is it me? Why are they doing so well at kinder? And then it all falls apart when they get home and these kids are holding it together.
I knew a little girl that was 5 years old and she started prep, and she would go all day at school, and the teachers reported she was an angel and everything was going really well, and she'd come home, she'd strip off completely naked and just cry on the floor for 20 minutes every day when she got home, because she was completely overwhelmed, had masked her feelings and all day, and had held it together so tightly that when she came home to her safe place, that she just felt like she needed no sensory input from her clothes. She couldn't handle that. She couldn't have any noise, any lights, and just needed to come back. Yeah.
There's some changes around that quiet time. Yeah. They've turned that's one element that they've been able to turn down, or two elements, which is really, really lovely. There's so much, there continues to be so much unpredictability in that space. It's a good starting point, which is great. It's been acknowledged. Alrighty, we are going to move on to spoon theory, and just have a little bit of a chat around. I don't know if this is something people are familiar with, unfamiliar with. There's some nodding in there, which is great. Again, this we like NeuroWild stuff. Emily Hammond she's a speech pathologist. She also has an autism diagnosis, ADHD, and she's got lived experience with 3 of her little ones on the autistic spectrum as well. So we're going to use Em's resources because they are super easy to understand. I would follow NeuroWild is, let me zoom that in a little bit for you. NeuroWild is her Instagram page, but she's also got some paid resources through Teachers Pay Teachers as well if you want any of her stuff. Let me just get that in frame for you. So every day I have things I need to do. Some of the things are fun, like seeing my friends, and some of the things are boring or annoying, like cleaning my room. Each of these things costs spoons. Spoons are kind of like mental energy. Everyone has a limited number of spoons to spend each day. Different things cost different amounts of spoons, and it's a good idea to be careful with your spoons, because once your spoons are used up, that's it for the day. Some days I have to spend my spoons on things that are not very fun. So this little guy's here's got visit mum's friend, homework, acting normal, tidying up, school, sitting still, and then over on this side has got handle problems, fun chat, stay up late, focus like a boss, start awesome project, make new friends, go to a birthday party, super chill, no stress. I don't have enough spoons for things I like when we've spent them on things we don't like. When I've run out of spoons, I get sad easily, I get angry more quickly, I find it hard to do things, and I just have nothing left. So I don't run out, it helps to make a plan about how I might use my spoons. So if I know there's something expensive coming up, something that will use lots of spoons, I will save some spoons for that. It also helps to know what I can, that I can get some spoons back by, insert your own things that may be useful here, resting, exploring my deep interests, eating, drinking, having time to myself, or stimming. Some days it's hard to keep track of how many spoons I've used, and I don't realise until it's too late. I didn't have any spoons left for my work, Mum. That's okay, I didn't have any left to clean up. Let's have a cuddle and watch a movie. When that happens, I know who can help me. This is spoon theory. It looks at having a finite number of resources per day. There's a short period of time where you can borrow spoons from the next day and maybe the one after, but that's going to mean you've got less spoons and less spoons that are available for you. And for our autistic folk, us and for each of us individually, our spoons or different tasks will vary in the amount of spoons. A shower for some of us might be a 1-spooner. For some others, it might be 5 spoons, but we've all got the same amount of spoons in a day. So just to pose a question, if you only had 12 spoons of energy to get through the day, how would you use them? What might that look like? You got some ideas? Got a plan? Beautiful. Hopefully that's handy. Except bathing is now 4 spoons. Does that muck up your day? Does that change things? Yep. Actually, yesterday you went to the zoo. So you've also taken out more spoons. So you've borrowed some spoons from tomorrow. So you've taken another 4 spoons yesterday. So you're now down to 8 spoons. Let's have a bit of a think about how this might look, how this might work for some of our little guys who are coming into kinder, who have had a hell of a morning, who have had a really big weekend, and how many spoons they might have left in their day. What does that mean for when I really want that toy? I really want that car. That was my car. I was using that, or I'd planned on using that. How does that go for being able to socialize, to be able to, solve that problem, to be able to negotiate something that might be inherently tricky? And we head down that emotional pathway. Alrighty. Any questions on spoon theory before we go on? We don't need to use it, but I feel like it's a nice way of kind of being able to conceptualize energy and demands of task as well. Liana, I'm going to leave this in your court.
Sure, I was just trying to work out how many spoons I needed. I needed about 32 to do what I need to do with my day. So, goodness me. But yeah, it's a good reminder. And also a good reminder of some of the things that might recharge or give back a spoon is maybe having a quiet corner, which is often there, and sort of directing a child to have some low stimulation play at the start of the day. And it actually might set them up to have a little bit more energy later on in the day too. Cool. So I guess, a lot of your focus is on the population that you guys work with, so young children. But I guess sort of what we were talking about, Sophie, is how do we know what it's going to look like for children as they get older, and not just as older children, but as a teen or an adult? So autism has a bit of a culture, like many parts of society. I know that there's strong culture for the deaf community. There's also a strong culture in the autism community. Things that we might notice in autistic people as adults is differences in eye contact, maybe some blunt and direct communication, so maybe less wishy-washy sort of small talk. There might be more info dumping, so that's like a word to describe just lots and lots of information around all areas of interest. For example, one of my autistic friends loves the Vampire Diaries, so we get updates on all of the characters quite a bit, which is awesome. Different tone of voice, so sometimes, not always, we might have autistic people might use either a very overt sort of language, or sometimes having American sounding accents. We might have people that use a more monotone sort of way to speak as well. It really depends on the person and individual, but you might notice some differences in tone, and black and white thinking too. So, well, we have to go to the shops today. It doesn't matter that it's, that I'm too tired, but I have to go, or I can't do it tomorrow, even though you maybe could wake up early tomorrow morning. It doesn't mean it's a deficit, it's just the way that person would like to do it. There's also the way that we might look at fashion. So, autistic people might be less concerned with what's trendy and cool and have their own sense of style. So that's something that, people might be more likely to artistically express themselves. There might also be sensory things like taking off the tag so you don't get that itchy feeling at the back, because that might be the overwhelming part that would distract them from other parts of the day. Dressing for comfort, including their special interests on their tops, cue Vampire Diaries t-shirts, and then also putting on things that are easy to put on and off to support if children or adults have fine motor struggles, and then sometimes having a lot of the same outfits as well. So autistic people might find comfort in having sort of a uniform that they would wear, that they know that they're comfortable, they know that it's predictable, they know that it's going to be something they feel good in, and they might just have lots of versions of that so that they can, take one less thing of the decision of what to wear, but also knowing that they're going to be comfortable throughout the day too. And here's a whole bunch of other things. So you might notice some echolalia, like repetition. It may not be as obvious in young children, but they might have, stims of, if you guys are on social media, sometimes there's really funny little grabs that people might use over and over again. People might use stim toys when they're in meetings like this, or, doing work to be more focused. People might collect things. They might also have strong exhaustion, again linking that to spoon theory. We might also notice that people might wear headphones in their workspace because it's a strategy to support their input of sound. They might see that people have foods that they really prefer, comfort foods that are predictable, the same, bring them regulation. And then you might also see things like they don't want their foods to touch, even if they're on the same plate. Again, that's a preference. Needing screen time to decompress and information to be repeated in multiple ways. So not just verbally, but maybe they also need it written as an instruction as well. A whole bunch of things that, autistic adults and teens experience or could experience.
We just shout out Neurodivergent Lou is an Instagram page who has a treasure trove of back catalogue of these little infographics that make it really, really easy to kind of start to understand some perspective. So she is a British early 20s. She's recently spoken at in British Parliament around autistic experience, but really, really shares that. And so much of this speaks to kind of where she's up to she's such a strong advocate for what's happening, but really real around this was really tricky for me. I couldn't get out of bed today because all of these things had happened, but she's got some really lovely strategies for remembering to do things, and it's just a really useful page to have a follow.
So, Brooke, I'm going to go through these really quickly in the next 3 slides, just because I'm looking at the time. So I just wanted to introduce the idea of masking. So masking is something that we discussed earlier. It is when autistic people are encouraged to feel like they need to behave normally or neurotypically. Masking encourages individuals to behave in ways that are unnatural to them or going against their instincts so that they fit in or are seen normal. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of spoons, and it might be where, again, at home you're seeing it's the safe place to unmask, and where people might have big meltdowns. So it might look like the child is fine on the surface, but they are masking or holding or hiding the true inner feelings and needs. So a few facts and figures here. Definitely can print this out if you need to see, but autistic people can face a lot of challenges if they're not in an inclusive environment. So in Australia, over 200,000 people have noted that they are autistic in the Department of Social Services survey. So 3.2% of school-age children are autistic, but again, this number is probably low because there's a lot of undiagnosed children. 95% of autistic people have a co-occurring disability, so might have co-occurring anxiety, ADHD, intellectual disability, sensory processing differences, language differences. So often autistic people will have other things that they're also working with. And then this is really sad, but the mental health of autistic people is significantly poorer across the board. And they're often, this is due to like stigma, social isolation, exhaustion, exclusion, shaming, pressure to be normal. So, it's really important that if there's people in your life or young children that we do, make the environment as inclusive as possible, and also reach out to, make sure they are linked in with some support services for their mental health too. And then the big question, which I think we will talk about another time, is autism increasing? I think we have better diagnostic processes. Potentially there's genetic reasons. We don't know the cause of autism or the reason why, but I think we're a lot better at recognizing it now than we ever were. But yeah, it's definitely something that is being researched quite a lot at the moment. Quick breakdown here of boys and girls. Boys and girls often present very differently. So, girls often mask a lot more, which means they're often hiding what they're feeling a lot more, and they may not receive their diagnoses as quickly as boys do. So some of the things that you might see in young girls are deep focus on passions or areas of interest, small circles, usually one or two safe friends, they might have strong leadership in play, like liking to, be the one that's in charge because that feels really predictable, and they have a bit more control around the situation. Maybe a bit more selective, feelings of shyness, things like that. Being really less prone to be traditional with their social conventions, being interested in socializing but unsure of how to make those connections, and maybe feeling emotions really deeply and intensely. Another great resource, you can see in the top right-hand corner, Yellow Ladybugs. That is such a great resource to find things for young autistic girls. It's basically for autistic girls and women, all of the different information. I would absolutely give them a follow and look up their website too, because they're great. And so, so this is the bit that we want to sort of finish off with, is how can we be neuroaffirming? So being neuroaffirming means to be led and to be led by and prioritizing advice from the autistic community, or the neurodivergent community. So, as a neurodivergent as neurotypical people and staff, we don't be the leaders, we listen to the voices of the people with lived experience. So what does that mean? We want to move away from our medical approach to our social approach, so inclusion and understanding that diversity occurs as a natural part of society. We want to review what we were doing in previous therapy approaches. So, as therapists, we do not condone things like hand over hand moving children's hands anymore, or, only giving a child a cracker when they give you eye contact. They are really like ancient versions of therapy that we've learnt are not helpful and are deficit-based and can be harmful to autistic people. We are committed to having ongoing discussions about our practice, and I know that you guys being here today means you are as well, and we're constantly listening, evolving and learning. We want to make sure that we're linking in with our neurodivergent colleagues and making conscious and active changes to the way we're supporting our families, and we're also supporting, as a whole at MCM, we've made some changes to try and make it so that it's beyond just the therapists and people who work with clients, but our entire org, to make it more inclusive. So it's very important because deficit-based language and compliance-based practice, like things like hand over hand and forcing eye contact, can encourage neurodivergent people to internalize their needs, like mask, and perpetuate the ableism, cause harm, and stigmatize children, or autistic children. Environments that are not affirming can make people feel like they are broken and wrong and cause further mental health problems down the line. Neurodivergent children deserve to feel safe, supported, seen, and heard. And again, you can see NeuroWild's got a beautiful infographic there talking about how if a child's not meeting an expectation, is the problem with the child or our expectation? So how do we do that? So inclusion's looking at social, cultural, linguistic diversity. I know that this is something that you guys work well with within your own practice principles. And we know that when we do a good job of inclusion and we do well, they can set them up for a good part in good future as well. All right, Brooke, I'll leave this one to you.
Alrighty. So how are we supporting neurodivergent children? And as we've talked a huge amount about already, treating every child as an individual. Every neurodivergent child is different and has different needs. Not every strategy or idea will work with every neurodivergent child. So we've given one strategy a go once. Let's give it a go again. Just because it hasn't worked for one particular child doesn't mean it won't work for somebody else. We're using inclusive language in the classroom. So probably a shout out here is around the a wording change of ASD, which we have typically historically used, which ASD stands for your autism spectrum disorder, and there's been a wording change from that disordered component. So we want to take off the language that the diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder, but the autistic community is leading change in this space and not seeing themselves as disordered. It's a difference, so hence our removal of that D off the disordered. So it's that language change, so going back to autism or autistic. I know there was a shift when I was at uni away to person first language, so child with autism away from the child is autistic. That's kind of had a bit of a swing recently, led by the autistic community, who are much more kind of owning that label, I guess, owning that diagnosis, and preferring to use autistic to explain their neurotype. So every child is different, every family is different. This is a bit of a encouragement just to have a check-in with how a family might be referring to their child. Are we using with autism? Are we using is autistic? That will be a check-in. Everybody is individual in that space. We're looking at adjustments for all of our kids. So not just the focus being on the neurodivergent child having to change. So much of the previous supports have been focused on the neurodivergent child having to do the changing of the routine, the changing of wearing the specific clothing that fits the neurotypical need, of fitting in, of needing to learn how everybody else does it. But that is such an imbalance in terms of the pressure that is put on these little guys, and we can balance that out, so we can equally support our neurotypical children to take on some of that responsibility of learning how our neurodivergent children are interacting, or what their preferences and play preferences might be. So we're not needing to bring the neurodivergent child specifically into the world of neurotypical. We can kind of teach each other about that space. A conversation I've had with an educator before was looking at that social interpreter role, as trying to be that person in the middle around. I had a little guy who at kinder had a drink bottle, and it was a brand new drink bottle for him, and a neurotypical child was coming past and wanting to make a comment on, we're going to go with the bird, you can't see it because it's blurry, I'm sorry, a bird, and he wanted to make a comment on the new drink bottle with the bird. Our little autistic friend thought that pointing was going to mean that child was going to take his drink bottle away. So he was really upset in that space, and it took our role in the middle to try and explain what was happening in that. That a neurotypical kid just wanted to say, hey, that's a really cool drink bottle. I like that monster truck. To try and explain what that inferred meaning was for our neurodivergent child, who was thinking that pointing was going to mean that he was going to take that drink bottle away. So it was just turning it into a little bit of an interpreter role around, this is what I think he's meaning, let me explain that. But also on the flip side, to be able to say, I think he thought you were going to take his drink bottle. You just want to say, hey, cool, monster truck, that's awesome. It's just that little kind of bit in the middle that we can be that social interpreter for both sides of the fence. We've done lots of chatting about visuals previously. There's a separate whole visuals training, but visuals are so supportive in this space, particularly for our little guys who might be in sensory overwhelm, in emotional overwhelm, where our language system's shut off. We can go back to our visuals so that it takes off the language load. It comes back to being predictable. So using visual schedules just help remind a sequence of order, especially when our higher level processing might be offline. Access to fidgets, and consistency and routine, and consistent points through the day where we can establish a routine, because our kids aren't really good at reading clocks yet. Some of them may have a special interest in clocks, that'd be great, but they're also not that good at reading the sun. I'm not that great at reading the sun and knowing what time it is. For us, we have the benefit of the clock. We know where things might be moving through the day. But for our little guys to have, it doesn't have to be a solid, rigid routine, but it has to, having something that is a consistent point that marks a routine and progress of time through the day is really important for knowing where we're up to, how close we are to going home, how long I kind of have to keep it together for before I can walk in the door and strip everything off. What does that look like? We've talked about neurodivergent Lou. We're not going to, I don't think we've got time to watch this. The link, this slide will go up in the chat. Liana, I might ask you to just link that, to grab that link as well. This is Lou having that conversation in Parliament, but looking at the power of educators in her space, and what that has meant for her ongoing. So it's a really lovely watch.
Brooke, I actually want to know if we can maybe skip to slide 46.
Oh God, we've done well, haven't we?
Yeah. So,
wait, tell me when to stop. My numbers aren't coming
up.
Go
back up. Sorry. Can you go up, up, up? There.
Cool.
So, I think for the last 5-10 minutes of this session, we're just going to talk about some of the things that we can make immediate changes in our classrooms to make its space more neuroaffirming, and then maybe we can have a quick chat about that. We'll just go to the next one if that's okay. Brooke. So some of the changes that we've made as a whole that we think align with the values that we've spoken about today is sort of changing what whole body listening looks like. Now, whole body listening is something that as a collective is a very helpful tool to help children settle and sort of set the expectations for the wider group and be able to get them to know the expectations. But what we found is that when we give these really prescriptive and rigid rules, it can actually be quite harmful to children that are autistic or neurodivergent because they are unable to do this and still might have ways of showing that they are listening. So it was something we worked on for a long time. Oh, sorry, go back, Brooke. Sorry, one more thing. So for some children, it might be what a good listener looks like, but for neurodivergent children, it may not be what their good listening looks like. So, for example, an autistic child might be listening if they are not looking directly, because looking directly might be difficult for them, but if they're looking slightly to the side, that means that they're listening intently. They might need to sit with their legs spread out, they might need to move their body, they might need to fidget or have something in their hands to listen, and they might not be making eye contact. So these are just things to consider. But let's just not throw away the whole thing. Let's look at what we can do. We can use Listening Larry. So Listening Larry is a nice alternative option that you can still structure, what expectations are for good listening, but it's more inclusive. So, my eyes will help me to listen when they are looking at the speaker, when they look down at the ground, or when they're looking at a visual support. So again, that is showing the children that some kids might be showing listening skills when they're doing this, and some kids might show their listening skills when their eyes are doing this. Again, you can look at the hands. So some children might need a fidget, some children might need to put it in their lap. I think the idea here is to know the individual child and set the expectations for the individual. If you know there's another child that is very distracted when they have a fidget and moving around, maybe it's not for them. But for the children that are identified as being having different needs, they can also have that accommodation made for them. So yeah, this is a really good example. I think there's one called everydayregulation.com. We'll try and find it for you guys. I'll see if we can post it into the chat after this as well. But yeah, I thought we could just have a few minutes for people now, Brooke, if this is okay, for anyone else to have a question or an idea that what they do in their classroom to make it more neuroaffirming or inclusive before we finish up.
Any thoughts or reflections on, is there anything that was new in that space? Was there something that you're familiar with and used a lot of?
The whole body listening poster. Yeah, I'll try and get a copy for you or a link to where that can be found as well. Again, it's not to say that it's the old whole listening poster wasn't useful in its time. I don't want to ever poo-poo something that was useful at the time, but I think we've just learnt more now and around how forcing these rigid rules on children can be reductive and not actually helpful to them. So yeah, the listening Larry is a great option because it gives the onus is not just on the autistic child or the neurodivergent child too, it's also on the neurotypical children to learn that there's different ways to be. And it's sort of that middle ground of it's not just the responsibility of the child with challenges to change themselves, it's also the children that are neurotypical to learn that there are different ways to contribute to. Oh, thanks, Ebony. Yes. Sophie, I can see that, yeah, different cultural backgrounds are not supportive of new approaches. Yes, a big challenge for you guys. For example, children will behave while they're at kinder. Yes, we have noticed this, and we also find that it can be a challenge in our own practices too. We know that neurodiversity affirming practice is a journey, and it's also something that needs to be discussed and brought families along on the journey with them. And we think that when we're using inclusive language, when we're using practices and have a reason for why we're doing things and explaining it to families, it can take a while to come along. But yeah, we still need to try and make the best of what we can do in those education settings too.
It's a lot of the time that we're leading this as well. Some of our families are coming from a very different space around what difference and what disability looks like. And in home countries or home cultures, there's so much shame and stigma attached to disability and difference, and so much drive for that that need to be normal or need to be typical. And it's a big journey to come along with. Families are not automatically in this space around that neuroaffirming space. It can be a journey for that, but I think that's where we're in a space of being able to lead that and to really see strengths and to be able to see, it's not a disorder, it's a difference, and that's okay. These guys have got so many strengths in so many different areas, but we can also recognize what is tricky and what is hard and what is challenging for them as well, and what their support needs may be. I think we get to be in such a privileged space to be able to support families to come along in that journey as well, but it can take time. And as we've talked about before, there can be that whole grief cycle that comes into here around that before we can finally get around to that acceptance piece. And it may be years. Some of our little guys, I'm working with a 12-year-old at the moment who would have absolutely been in that space and we're slowly working with family. We've been through so many different components of what that understanding looks like, what that kind of future might look like, but also being able to see strengths and see what they're good at, what they like. And you know what? That's so okay. It's so okay to still be into Peppa Pig. And we've watched Peppa Pig at, 100,000 views personally for one little guy. And that's okay. That's what we're really into. That's what we really like.
Yeah, and as educators too, it's the onus is not just on you as the sole educator to be the one that changes everything. We can have a team around them, and reaching out and trying to see if we can refer on to other supports as well is really important, because when the conversation is had in lots of different spaces and different ways, in a supportive, non-pushy way, I think it can be quite a good experience for families to have lots of supports available to them. So that's another thing to consider too. Yes.
Finally, before we finish up, these are a couple of books that we really like. There are so many different ones out there at the moment around difference and inclusion, and Aldi's had some really good ones recently around, I don't have it with me, but there's a lovely one around an ice cream truck, and another one about a giraffe in a home. But there's a couple around. There are a whole bunch of resources and references that we have used, so they'll be back on the back of the slides. We'll share a link to the slides. I'm in training for the rest of the day, but we'll pop it up after 4 o'clock this afternoon to these slides, and a recording will be available for any bits that we've skipped over because we've run out of time. The slides will be in there for you to go back and have a look at. Alrighty, thank you for sticking with us. We've got through a lot today. Liana and I can talk for days, so we've got to the end. But any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or to come back to us after, and we will do our best to answer it. But I hope to see you guys soon.